Good evening and welcome to this edition of Jay's Retro Toys and Games. We're still in Season 3, and this is Episode 69 on this October 16th, 2023. Well, we kind of took a little break for a little bit to kind of get everything kind of reworked, and we re-uploaded the back episodes of the Atari series, including the 2600. Hopefully you'll be able to see that again and get the views up a little bit. We'll talk about that just a little bit. Right now we're going to talk about a console that preceded the 2600 but didn't do so well. And by that I mean it was trying to compete, but it just couldn't get over the hump. It's a home video game console introduced by Atari in 1982. It's a higher-end complement for the popular Atari Video Computer System. Was renamed to the Atari 2600 at the time of the 5200's launch, and it was created to compete with Mattel's Intellivision, but the 5200 wound up a direct competitor of ColecoVision shortly after its release. And while the Coleco system shipped with the first home version of Nintendo's Donkey Kong, the 5200 included the 1978 arcade game Super Breakout, which had already appeared on the Atari 8-bit family, and Atari VCS in 1979 and 81 respectively. Didn't last too long. They only sold 1 million units, far short of its predecessor sale of over 30 million. Thankfully, the Atari 7800, which we'll look at in episode 70, eased the pain back in 1984. But tonight we're going to look at this guy, this thing called the Atari 5200, and surely get to the bottom of why it failed. This is all coming up right now on Jay's Retro Toys and Games. Okay, let's go ahead and get on with the show here. I'm Jason Acanio, and hope you're having a fantastic Monday night on this October 16, 2023. This is episode 69 of Jay's Retro Toys and Games, and we're kind of cruising along here, and the only reason why it's been so long since we've made a new episode is because we had so much issues on our channel for some reason or another. When we first uploaded the 2600 to YouTube, for some reason we were not getting the views. We posted it all over the Facebook group pages. We really promoted it in our group pages that were kind of connected, including our own Jay's Retro Toys and Games Facebook group page. Something was lacking. Not sure what it was, because I have a feeling that when we finished the He-Man and She-Ra series and all of the Masters of the Universe stuff, going to the console wars was a really big jump of the shark, as you would like to call it. So in this case, the console, or the start of the console wars, got lost in the mix. Whatever the case, we're going to try to repost the Atari 2600 episode for you. It's up there right now. Please do go ahead and look at it, get those views up, and we'll take it from there. Now on to this Atari 5200 that basically was trying to compete with the 2600, but had anywheres the kind of popularity that you would come to expect from a Atari system. Okay, they were almost compatible to the 2600, but the problem was the joysticks were very, very difficult to operate. They had a numeric keypad. They also had a pause button and a reset button, which was something that was the first thing you ever noticed. Long before Nintendo even had those things, there was pause buttons, but they didn't come out till the Atari 5200. So let's look at the hardware for what it's worth here. Much of the technology in the Atari 8-bit family of home computers was originally developed as a second-generation games console intended to replace the Atari Video Computer System console. However, as the system was reaching completion, the personal computer revolution was starting with the release of machines like the Commodore PET, the TRS-80, and Apple II. These machines had less advanced hardware than the new Atari technology, but sold for much higher prices with associated higher profit margins. Atari's management decided to enter this market, and the technology was repackaged into the Atari 400 and 800. The chipset used in these machines was created with the mindset that the VCS would likely be obsolete by 1980. Atari later decided to re-enter the games market with a design that closely matched their original 1978 specifications. In its prototype stage, the 5200 was originally called the Atari Video System X, or the Advanced Video Computer System, and was codenamed PAM after a female employee at Atari Inc. Now, it was also rumored that PAM actually stood for Personal Arcade Machine, as the majority of games for the system ended up being arcade conversions. Actual working Atari Video System X machines whose hardware is 100% identical to the Atari 5200 do exist, but are extremely rare. Now, the initial 1982 release of the system featured 4 controller ports, where nearly all other systems of the day had only 1 or 2. The 5200 also featured a new style of controller with an analog joystick, numerical keypad, 2 fire buttons on each side of the controller, and game function keys for start, pause, and reset. The 5200 also featured the innovation of the first automatic TV switch box, allowing it to automatically switch from regular TV viewing to the game system signal when the system was activated. Previous RF adapters required the user to slide a switch on the adapter by hand. The RF box was also where the power supply connected in a unique dual power television signal setup similar to the RCA Studio 2s. A single cable coming out of the 5200 plugged into the switch box and carried both electricity and the television signal. The 1983 revision of the Atari 5200 has 2 controller ports instead of 4, and a change back to the more conventional separate power supply and standard non-auto switching RF switches. It also has changes in the cartridge port address lines to allow for the Atari 2600 adapter released that year. And while the adapter was only made to work on the 2-port version, modifications can be made to the 4-port to make it line compatible. In fact, towards the end of the 4-port model's production run, there was a limited number of consoles produced which included these modifications. These consoles can be identified by an asterisk in their serial numbers. At one point, following the 5200's release, Atari planned a smaller, cost-reduced version of the Atari 5200, which removed the controller storage bin, codenamed the Atari 5100, aka 5200 Junior. Only a few fully working prototype 5100s were made before the project was canceled. The controller prototypes used in the electrical development lab employed a yoke and gimbal mechanism that came from an RC airplane controller set. The design of the analog joystick, which used a weak rubber boot rather than springs to provide centering, proved to be ungainly and unreliable. They quickly became the Achilles heel of the system due to the combination of an overly complex mechanical design and a very low-cost internal flex circuit system. Another major flaw of the controllers was that the design did not translate into a linear acceleration from the center through the arc of the stick travel. The controllers did, however, include a pause button, a unique feature at the time. Various third-party replacement joysticks were also released, including those made by Wico. Atari Inc. released the ProLine trackball controllers for the system, which was used primarily for gaming titles such as Centipede and Missile Command. A paddle controller and an updated self-centering version of the original controller were also in development but never made it to market. Games were shipped with plastic card overlays that snapped in over the keyboard or the keypad. The card would indicate which game functions, such as changing the view or vehicle speed, were assigned to each key. The primary controller was ranked the 10th worst video game controller by IGN editor Craig Harris. An editor for Next Generation and it said that their non-centering joysticks rendered many games nearly unplayable. David H. All in 1983 described the Atari 5200 as a 400 computer in disguise. Its internal design is a tweaked version of the Atari 8-bit family using the Antic, Pokey, and GTIA coprocessors. Its software designed for one does not run on the other, but source code can be mechanically converted unless it uses computer-specific features. Antic magazine reported in 1984 that the similarities grossly outweigh the differences so that a 5200 program can be developed and almost entirely debugged on an Atari 8-bit computer before testing on a 5200. Now, John J. Anderson of Creative Computing alluded to the incompatibility being intentional, caused by Atari's console division removing 8-bit compatibility to not lose control to the rival computer division. Besides the 5200's lack of a keyboard, the differences are the Atari computer 10 kilobyte operating system is replaced with a simpler 2 kilobyte version, of which one of the kilobytes is the built-in character set. Some hardware registers, such as those of the GTIA and Pokey chips, are at different memory locations. The purpose of some registers is slightly different on the 5200, and the 5200's analog joysticks appear as pairs of paddles to the hardware, which requires different input handling from the digital joystick input of the Atari computers. In 1987, Atari Corporation released the XE Game System console, which is a repackaged 65XE from 1985 with a detachable keyboard that can run home computer titles directly, unlike the 5200. And Anderson wrote in 1984 that Atari could have released a console compatible with computer software in 1981. The Atari 5200 did not fare well commercially compared to its predecessor, the 2600. While it touted superior graphics to the 2600 and Mattel's Intellivision, the system was initially incompatible with the 2600's expansive library of games, and some market analysts have speculated that this hurt its sales, especially since an Atari 2600 cartridge adapter had been released for the Intellivision 2. A revised two-port model was released in 1983, along with a game adapter that allowed gamers to play all 2600 games, and this lack of new games was due in part to a lack of funding, with Atari continuing to develop most of its games for the saturated 2600 market. Many of the 5200 games appeared simply as updated versions of 2600 titles, which failed to excite consumers. Its pack-in game Super Breakout was criticized for not doing enough to demonstrate the system's capabilities. This gave the ColecoVision a significant advantage as its pack-in Donkey Kong delivered a more authentic arcade experience than any previous game cartridge. In its list of the top 25 game consoles of all time, IGN claimed that the main reason for the 5200's market failure was the technological superiority of its competitor, while other sources maintain that the two consoles are roughly equivalent in power. The 5200 received much criticism for the sloppy design of its non-centering analog controllers, and Anderson described the controllers as absolutely atrocious. David H. All of Creative Computing, Video, and Arcade Games said in 1983 that the Atari 5200 is, dare I say it, Atari's answer to Intellivision, ColecoVision, and the Astrocade, describing the console as a true mass-market version of the Atari 8-bit computers despite the software incompatibility. He criticized the joystick's imprecise control but said that it is at least as good as many other controllers, and wondered why Super Breakout was the pack-in game when it did not use the 5200's improved graphics. And if you really want to get on the technical side of things, you can scroll down and look at the technical specifications. Only one of those IT guys that really work on stuff like that can understand what we're talking about with color palettes, CPUs, screen resolutions, all that good stuff. Popular culture critical to the plot of the 1984 film Cloak and Dagger is an Atari 5200 game cartridge called Cloak and Dagger. The arcade version appears in the movie. In actuality, the 5200 version was started but never completed. The game was under development with the title Agent X when the movie producers and Atari learned of each other's projects and decided to cooperate. This collaboration was part of a larger phenomenon of films featuring video games as critical plot elements, as with Tron and The Last Starfighter, and a video game tie-in to the same films, as with the Tron games for the Intellivision and other platforms. If you want to see the list of 5,200 games, you can. You can click on that and it'll give you all of that. We'll talk about the 5,200 games when we get to the games. We're looking at consoles only. They have emulators, and we'll look at that big video game crash of 1983 when it's all said and done after we look at the consoles later on. But that is all right now for this edition of Jay's Retro Toys and Games, talking about the Atari 5200. Next, this Wednesday coming up, will be episode 70, and we're going to be looking at the one console that really came back like the Mario series. You know, Mario 1, Super Mario Brothers, paved the way for Nintendo games. Well, when they came out with Mario 2, it was like the exception of the 5200. It was a complete failure. But then Nintendo resurrected itself and said, we're going to make a better game, Mario Brothers, better than 2, that will completely crush the gaming industry. And when Mario 3 came out, forget it. It was just like Mario 1 all over again. Well, the Atari 7800 Pro System is like Mario 3. It was released by the Atari Corporation in '86 as the successor to both the 2600 and the 5200. Can run almost all Atari 2600 cartridges, making one of the first consoles with backward compatibility, and it's shipped with a different model of joystick from the 2600 standard CX40 and Pole Position 2 as the pack-in game. Most of the announced titles at launch were ports of 1981 to 83 arcade video games. So we'll look at the 7800 in all of its glory as they finally got it right. You can't copy the 2600, but you can always make a console more attractive and up-to-date for its time in the 7800. And we'll definitely look at that on Wednesday's edition of Jay's Retro Toys and Games. I'm Jason Icanio, thanking you once again. Like I said at the beginning of the program, do watch the 2600 episode. That'll give you all of the information you need. Look also at when we started the console wars with the corporation, what Atari is all about. Lots of channels kind of give you just what the consoles are about. We delved into the company and gave you the history timeline of everything that Atari had done. Look at those again, backtrack, and then join us on Wednesday night for episode 70, where we look at Atari 7800. Have a great night. We'll see you Wednesday. Bye for now.